A very good day to our lecturer Inche Ashamuddin. Today our group will be presenting on the problem case on the Parmalat scandal. Our group consists of Kaveenaa, Shree, I, Darshini and also Navishasre. For question one, I, Kaveenaa Shree Mahindran, matrix number 01DAT19F2012 will be explaining on it. Question 1. Explain the actions committed by Parmalat that can be charged as criminal fraud. The Parmalat embarrassment has been portrayed by the SEC as one of the biggest and most brazen corporate financial frauds in the history. As per Tanzi, Lehman Brothers is doing this to drive down the cost of Parmalat shares, so it very well may be purchased at a lower cost. Tanzi is blamed for swindling financial bankers through complex monetary game plans and bond seaward exchanging, as well as manufacturing records to conceal misfortunes and misrepresenting books. This is a great illusion of the kind of trickiness utilized by Parmalat. For instance, Bonlat guaranteed a Cuban organization owed them $767 million for 300 tons of powdered milk it had bought. Following that, Parmalat was professed to be owed the cash. The total bargain, be that as it may, didn't happen and was made up to keep Parmalat's liquidity above water. Auditors couldn't lay out that north of 200 Parmalat-made organizations like Bonlat were associated with the misrepresentation. Chief Financial Officer Fausto Tona, for instance, kept up with the misrepresentation by sending false paper to the evaluators to fabricate the subsidiaries' presence. Callisto Tanzi confessed to tricking Parmalat's funds for over a decade, taking in any event $600 million from the public corporation and piping it into privately owned companies. The Parmalat board of directors, which was for the most part contained Tanzi's relatives and controlled 51% of the organization, had no second thoughts about the way things were run. The Parmalat issue started in late 2003 when it was uncovered that more than 4 billion euros, roughly $5.64 billion in business cash, had disappeared from a Bank of America account. One of the significant flaws in corporate governance was the absence of oversight by the board of directors. In spite of the different sketchy highlights of Parmalat's tasks, the board of chiefs never requests replies to any inquiries they could have had, and they won't ever raise stress over administration rights, administration tight relationship with the organization's underlying auditors. Since it set an excessive amount of confidence in the uprightness of its authority and the ability of its evaluators, the organization became presented to extortion. Parmalat Financiera has misjudged their announced obligation of £6.4 billion by no less than £7.9 billion as of September 30th, 2003. Parmalat Financiera utilized a few techniques to disguise its obligation, including the first one, removing around £3.3 billion of obligation held by one of its candidates, substances. Number 2, recording around 1 billion of obligation as value through made-up credit investment arrangements. And number 3, removing around 5 million pounds of liabilities by falsely describing the offer of certain receivables as non-recourse when the organization held a commitment to guarantee that the receivables were eventually settled. Number 4, during the offer of a Brazilian subsidiary, generally 300 million pounds in the rate related with the firm was unreasonably killed. Number 5, misclarifying about 300 million euros in bank obligation as intercompany obligation, bringing about its ill-advised end in combination. That's all from me for question number 1. I would like to call upon the next member to present question number 2.
Thank you, Kaveenaa. My name is Navishasre and my matric card number is 01D1819F2018. Now I'll be explaining question 2 and 3. Question 2. Describe the most recent rules on corporate governance for public firms that could be practiced by Parmalat to ensure the integrity of management and financial reporting will not be compromised. Presumably, the most striking distinction between the US and continental Europe concerns the degree of private authorization. Italy is no special case. However, the law on books is by and by extremely severe. There are no questions at all that auditors are obligated for harms. As noticed, this responsibility system can likewise be constructed by common principles concerning the authoritative commitments and misdeed. All the more explicitly concerning the idea of the auditing association's obligation, it plainly is illegally binding when the organization is weak. It should be brought up that Italian researchers hold that the auditors can't bring protections of up in pari delicto, contributory carelessness, and shortcoming and messy hands. Corporate administrations ought to be seen as a chance for organizations to show to partners that they have extensive and viable corporate administrations methods. All chiefs ought to constantly satisfy their commitments and obligations as guided to the greatest advantage of the firm. Likewise, all the directors should act with trustworthiness, set a genuine model, and remain current on his obligations as a chief as well as the organization's way of behaving, business exercises, and progress. Uh, Next, the partition of the chairman and CEO position increments responsibility and permits the portion of assignments between them. In such manner, no single individual might affect the board's discussions and choices. The chairman's liabilities ought to incorporate directing the board's aggregate oversight of the executives, while the CEO centers around the organization's business and everyday tasks. Auditors are additionally obligated towards bank and investors. Next, I'll be explaining question 3, which is describe the changes in Parmalat's control system and corporate governance structure to mitigate the risk of accounting and business fraud in future years. Great corporate administration helps the associations in overseeing chance and lessening the chance of debasement. At the point when chiefs and top administration are not expected to follow an unmistakable administration code, embarrassment and mispresentation inside a firm are more probable. Governance refers to the structure and procedures that attempt to promote accountability, transparency, responsiveness, rule of law, stability, equity, and inclusivity, empowerment, and broad-based involvement. Corporate governance clarifies the allocation of risk management responsibilities within the organization and outline how risk management will be applied at each level. The board must develop lines of communication with management to fulfill these obligations. And lastly, all three are vital to the effective operation of a business and the development of strong professional relationships among its stakeholders, which would include board directors, managers, workers, including most significantly shareholders. That's all from me. Next, I will pass to the next presenter.
Navishasre. Now I would like to explain about question number 4 and 5. So first I will explain about question number 4, that is proposed differences to the auditors Deloitte and Grant Thornton against the Parmalat's third-party lawsuit if they were sued for negligence. So there are few motivation to protection the auditor, which is Deloitte and Grant Thornton against the Parmalat outsider claim in the event that they were sued for carelessness. So from the get-go, regardless of the potential for claims against auditors, may outsider case be pointless. So in the light of the case, assuming the outsider sues the auditor, the firm being examined is presently not feasible or bankrupt, the claim is uncalled for in the light of the fact that the auditor isn't answerable for guaranteeing that the organization is practical and can keep on working over the long haul. The auditor is no doubt answerable for guaranteeing that the fiscal summaries are decently introduced in contrast with the significant assessment standards. Moreover, negligible claims might open organization to review risk. So there are unavoidable instances such as when an auditor selects a sample to review that it is even typical of the total data population. So the errors are the result of appearing circumstances, not a weakness in the inspector. In any case, if an auditor fails to follow the general reviewing process of the governing accounting body, there would be adequate grounds for a claim known as a review disappointment. Next, I will be explaining about question number 5, that is, verify specific audit procedures that might have uncovered Parmalat fraud. Parmalat went from having annual sales of 7.6 billion euros in 2002 to being and declared insolvent a year later. So Parmalat was able to defraud its financial backers of billions of dollars because to an arrangement of Europe's Enron. Grant Thornton and Deloitte's internal auditing mechanisms were ineffective. Many of Parmalat's assets were inflated while its liabilities were minimized. The special purpose entities and balance sheet transactions were not adequately tested by the examiners. Trying for the presence is one of the most important auditing approaches. So the auditors may have discovered that these accounts were framed by Parmalat and were being used as an obligation covers by checking for their presence and digging deeper into them. And the liquidity illusion also would have been eliminated. Overall, the Deloitte organization should have kept an eye on the Italian division of the corporation. So when a few Deloitte global officers notice a risk of exhaustion in the Palmer case, an interval investigation should have been conducted right away. So when there is a suspense, misrepresentation is a distinct possibility. This situation lacked freedom in a big way. The organization became helpless in the face of misrepresentation because it placed so much faith in the legitimacy of its chiefs and the competency of its examiners. So the bogus archive given by the CFO should have been truly examined and letters should have been addressed to these entities confirming the amounts owed to Parmalat. So that's all from me. Thank you.
That will be all from us today on the problem case on the Parmalat scandal. Thank you.